Canada truly has a goalkeeping battle and dilemma, as both goalkeepers are now without clubs, as Dane St. Clair and Maxime Crépeau have both left their MLS sides and are now free agents. But for Maxime Crépeau, he has seen his Portland Timbers, his former side, decline his contract option after he became the backup goalkeeper this past season to another Canadian in James Pantemis. But now leaves Maxime Crépeau with no club. He is now a free agent at the age of 31 years old and technically Canada's 1B in their goalkeeping battle. But this becomes a difficult situation for Maxime Crépeau, who is leading into one of his last big moves in his footballing career at 31 years old. This is a major decision he will have to make in the lead up to a World Cup year where he wants to be competing for the number one role to be the starter in Toronto at BMO Field. Maxime Crépeau has to choose his next club wisely. He has to make his next choice correct, where he will be a starter, where he will be playing week in, week out, where he can be possibly in a big market and in the eyes of Canadian supporters. There is only one club where I think Maxime Crépeau should end up, and one side that should be doing absolutely everything to land the Canadian international in Toronto FC. Toronto FC for me is the side that makes sense for Maxime Crépeau. And let's start with Maxime Crépeau's side of this deal. This is a well-experienced Canadian international goalie who is 31 years old. This is possibly his last major move at the tail end of his footballing career. As a goalkeeper, thankfully, they go a bit deeper into their footballing careers. So at 31 years old, he could possibly have 3, 4, maybe 5 years left in his footballing lifespan. So this could be a very interesting move to Toronto FC. But for Maxime Crépeau, in terms of Canadian starting position, this is a club that could really bolster his stock and potential to the lead up to starting for Canada. I truly believe this. This is a side that is still a major market within the MLS. Toronto is a side that still has a lot of pull, but in terms of Canadians, this is a side that has all the eyes, has all the focus, has all media driven on them, is Toronto FC. Whether we like it or not, Toronto FC is that club in Canada that gets all the media attention. And Maxime Crépeau, playing for a side like that, will have all the supporters watching him for the most part constantly. And they will have him in the back of their mind for their number one for the Canadian men's national team, which is a huge boost for Maxime Crépeau and to continue to build that confidence once again. While also Toronto FC becomes a side that is very appealing for both sides because Toronto FC do not have a current recognized number one goalkeeper on the roster, as they've let go and decided to decline the contract option of the American in Sean Johnston, freeing up a lot of money and freeing up a number one goalkeeping position and a major vacancy, because currently they have two Canadians on the books in goal. And of course, Di Rosario, who is 21 years old, who is still learning his trade with no MLS experience, while their other current number one in 25-year-old Canadian in Luke Garvin, who does not have much minutes, has 3 games in the MLS last season for Toronto FC, and isn't a true number one goalkeeper, especially for a rebuilding and retooling MLS side in Toronto FC. So there's a clear role where Maxime Crépeau can jump into, he can walk straight into, and that is his position. While Toronto FC have now freed up a load of money from Sean Johnston and can transfer that straight to a new goalkeeper at a no-brainer in Maxime Crépeau. And what is very appealing for this with Maxime Crépeau is he gets the money, he gets the number one role, he gets the minutes, and is also in the fans' view, which is huge for the national team, and will also be more in Jesse Marsch's mind because he would be playing week in, week out, getting starting minutes with a side in Toronto FC who are in the midst of a rebuild, are in the midst of a retooling. Toronto FC is changing their side, they're rebuilding, and they are starting from the spine. Bringing in a new goalkeeper is exactly what you need to do, and you bring in someone with experience, with knowledge of the league, who has won trophies, you can't go wrong. Maxime Crépeau has the resume, has the experience, and has done it at every level in North America in the MLS. This is a guy who's played in Portland, played in LAFC, done it across Canada at CF Montreal and Vancouver Whitecaps. He knows how to get the job done. He has won trophies with Montreal with the Canadian Championship, won the MLS with LAFC, putting his body on the line to win the title for his side. Maxime Crépeau is someone you want in your side at 31 years old, who's been around the league, has the experience you need to start the rebuild. What you need when rebuilding a club in Toronto FC is the spine, and what that starts with is the goalkeeper. A goalkeeper that can keep you in games, a goalkeeper who has won at the highest level in the MLS, but is also not aged out yet. This is a goalkeeper in Maxime Crépeau at 31 years old, who, like I said, is probably choosing his last big move. And joining Toronto FC is very exciting for the here and now, for his potential to be a starter, to have opportunities to start on a weekly basis, to face shots and have opportunities to prove himself for the World Cup, while also for his future and what could come. This Toronto FC side is a big market. They're an exciting club. They're going to attract players, which is what matters. Because at 31 years old, Maxime Crépeau could be here for the start of the rebuild and could possibly help see them through a playoff run. And having that experience of being there through a playoff, of being there through tough times through MLS sides, is massive. And what he could bring to help rebuild this spine, rebuild this Toronto FC side, rebuild their identity, is something you don't get too often. And especially in a Canadian, is very exciting. And what we have to remember is, at the start earlier in this year when Toronto FC were going to start the rebuild, they said with the World Cup coming, they want a Canadian international. They wanted to sign someone who would help bring people to their seats, who would be at the World Cup roster, and someone who might even potentially start. And that's Maxime Crépeau. They couldn't have had someone fall into their laps any better. You've opened up your starting role. You want a Canadian international. You want to rebuild this team. You want to start with the spine. He's your man. Maxime Crépeau. Green flags all over the place. You couldn't find a better reference to a Grand Slam signing than Maxime Crépeau. You transfer the money from Sean Johnson simply to Maxime Crépeau's bank account. Wham bam, it is done. It is a move that makes complete sense, and why Toronto FC should chase after Maxime Crépeau, and why he needs to be their number one starter going into next season. You get a recognized number one. You get a guy who won't cost more than Sean Johnson, a guy with experience, who is Canadian, who can complete the Canadian trifecta of CF Montreal, Vancouver Whitecaps, and Toronto FC, something that doesn't happen too often. I'm sure Maxime Crépeau might want that title as well. This is a move that makes perfect sense for all parties involved, and as a supporter of the Canadian men's national team, I would love to see Maxime Crépeau come back to Canada, play at a club that is desperate for a number one starter, and the only Canadian club right now that needs a number one goalkeeper. And yes, they might not be a club at this moment fighting for an MLS title, but they are a club that will give up shots, will give up chances, and has the opportunity for Maxime Crépeau to prove why he should be starting for Canada at the 2026 Home World Cup in Toronto and at BMO Field. Guys, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Do you think Maxime Crépeau should go to Toronto FC and play for TFC? Do you guys enjoy the more in-depth breakdown of a potential perfect transfer for a Canadian? Let me know your thoughts on the more in-depth video as well. Smash that like button, hit that sub button, guys, because your support is absolutely appreciated, and it's always so much fun making content for you guys, and I'll see you guys for the next one. Peace.